The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Finance number 2 bill. Clauses 1 to 4, clauses 12 and 13, clause 19 and certain new clauses. Committee.
Order. Under the order of the House of 17th April, we shall now move to Committee of the whole House. Order. Order.
Finance number 2 bill. Clauses 1 to 4, clauses 12 and 13, clause 19 and certain new clauses.
We will begin with clause 1 stand part, with which it will be convenient to consider the other clauses and new clauses in group 1 as on the selection paper. The question is that clause 1 stand part of the bill. I call the Minister, Nigel Huddleston.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's an honour to open this debate today. I'd like to start by setting out how, because of the progress this government has made, we have been able to cut taxes as part of our plan to reward work and grow the economy. The government has cut national insurance at both autumn statement and spring budget and has made above-inflation increases to thresholds since 2010, with the basic rate threshold rising from £6,475 to £12,570 today. Taken together, these measures mean an average worker on £35,400 in 2024-25 will save £1,500 in personal taxes, more than they otherwise would have done. Due to the significant real terms increases to the personal allowance, it is estimated that there will be 1.8 million people taken out of income tax by 2024-25 altogether, compared to the threshold rising in line with inflation from 2010-11. All workers can now earn £1,000 a month before paying any tax, due to the significant increases also to the national insurance contributions starting threshold, which we changed in July 2022. I'd now like to turn to the specifics of the first 4 clauses of this bill, Madam Chair. Income tax is the largest source of government revenue and helps to fund the UK's schools, hospitals, defence and other essential services that we all rely on. In 2024-25, it is expected to raise over £302 billion. And each year, the government must legislate to charge and set the rates of income tax, and that is why we are all here today. Clauses 1 to 3 impose a charge to and set rates of income tax for 2024-25. These rates are not being changed by this bill, but rather we are confirming that they will remain the same. Clause 1 imposes a charge on individuals to pay income tax for the year 2024-25. Clause 2 sets the main rates of income tax, mainly the basic rate of 20%, the higher rate of 40% and the additional rate of 45%. And these will apply to non-savings, non-dividend income of taxpayers in England and Northern Ireland. These rates are set separately to Clause 3, as the income tax rates for non-saving, non-dividend income, for example, earnings from employment, are devolved to the Scottish and Welsh governments, and they are set by their respective parliaments. The decision to separate savings and dividends from other forms of income was made as part of the devolution settlements. It ensures that the UK system works effectively and coherently, recognising that dividend and savings income is generally more mobile and generated across the UK, as well as some interactions with corporation tax, which of course is not devolved. Clause 3 sets the default rates of income tax at the same levels as the main rates, namely 20%, 40% and 45% across the entire UK. These rates apply to the non-savings, non-dividend income of taxpayers who are not subject to the main rates of income tax, Welsh rates of income tax or Scottish income tax. For example, it might apply to non-UK resident individuals. Clause 3 also sets the savings rates of income tax for all UK taxpayers, again at 20%, 40% and 45%. Madam Chair, as I mentioned earlier, income tax is a vital revenue stream for our public services, without which we could not fund these public services, including our schools and our hospitals and defence. And so it is important that we keep it at its current level. So,
grateful to the Minister to give me, but the emails I received from constituents ask me, why is the government not unfreezing the personal tax thresholds?
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for that comment. And of course, we all know that because of the level of intervention that we had to take out of necessity during the pandemic and in response to the cost of living challenges meant that government intervention was far higher, far greater than any of us anticipated, to the tune of £400 billion in the pandemic and £100 billion for the cost of living challenges. That money obviously has to be paid back, and I think most of our constituents know that. And this is a pattern that we've seen right around the world, where tax levels, therefore, out of necessity, have had to be higher. That means, therefore, that thresholds have not been able to move in the way that we would normally have liked. However, I think it's really important that now economic circumstances are changing, we have turned a corner and we are able to reduce taxes, for example, with the 27 million people who will be receiving £900 on average extra through the national insurance cuts because of the measures that we have taken.
For giving me a second time, and of course he started his remarks talking about some of the fiscal measures the government have taken to reduce tax, but by not unfreezing the personal allowances, isn't the government just taking money from one pocket and putting it back in the other?
No, because the important thing is, and I advise people to do this, including the Honourable Member, if you look at your wage slip for a few months ago, say in December last year, you will see that there is a direct impact because of the changes in national insurance we made in January and then again more recently in April. You will see that you are paying less national insurance now than you were in the past. That is transparently and clearly a tax cut. Because of the direction of travel is now changing, we're able to reduce taxation. Of course, across the whole of the Western world, taxes have increased. Our tax level is projected to increase to about 37%. That compares to Germany's about 39%, to Italy's about 42%, or France about 46%. So this is a phenomenon where governments have had to intervene, have had to spend more money, and therefore, as an obvious consequence, had to increase taxation to a greater level than anticipated or desired. But now we are in a position, we're back to growth, we are now back on a firmer footing, the economy has turned a corner, and we're now able to reward the hard work of the British public by reducing taxation. We're doing that in the form of income tax cuts, and as the Chancellor and the Prime Minister have said on multiple occasions, that is the direction of travel that we wish to continue. And as I said, if people look at their pay packets, I recognise that it's one thing saying something, it's one thing, as in the Chamber, talking about implementing laws, but people will now see it in their pay packets in a meaningful way. An average worker on £35,400 will be £900 better off because and as a result of these national insurance cuts. And that is a meaningful amount for constituents right across the country, including, of course, in his constituency. And, of course, another principle of taxation is fairness. And it is fair, income tax is fair. Those with the most contribute the most. The income tax system is highly progressive, with different rates of tax sitting above an internationally high personal allowance. The top 5% of income taxpayers are projected to pay nearly half of all income tax in 2023-24. The top 1% are projected to pay over 28% of income tax. And thanks to the personal allowance, almost a quarter of individuals will not pay income tax at all in 2024-25. It's important to note as well that this percentage paid by the top earners is greater than it was under the last Labour government. In other words, the tax system is more progressive under the Conservatives. Income tax is also internationally competitive. According to the OECD, the UK has some of the most generous starting allowances for income tax and social security contributions in the OECD, and the most generous in the G7. That's more generous than France, Germany, Italy, Canada, Japan, and the US. According to the OECD, in the United Kingdom, the average single worker faced a net average tax rate of 23.7% in 2023, compared with the OECD average of 24.9%. In other words, in the United Kingdom, the take-home pay of an average single worker, after tax and benefits, was 76.3% of their gross wage, compared with the OECD average of 75.1%. I've talked a lot of statistics there, but what this really means is more money in people's pockets to spend as they wish and they would like, a fundamental Conservative philosophy. However, we have also been able to return some money to taxpayers, as I said, now that inflation is falling and the economy is improving, by reducing national insurance contributions. And we've put money back into people's pockets. We've been prioritising tax cuts for those in work, and we believe that that is the best way to stimulate growth in the economy overall. Turning now to Clause 4, which continues the theme of maintenance of the income tax arrangements by keeping the starting rate for savings limit at its current level of £5,000 for the 2024-25 tax year. Now, many colleagues may be familiar with this, but some may not. So, briefly, by way of explanation, the starting rate for savings is an extra £5,000 tax-free allowance for interest from savings specifically, for individuals who have earned incomes of less than £17,570. And this particularly supports people with low earned income, for example, pensioners, reliant on savings interest. Now, the government made significant changes to the starting rate for savings in 2015, when the government raised the threshold at which you get the starting rate for savings from £2,880 to £5,000, and lowered the starting rate for savings from 10% to 0%. And as many members of the House will be aware, the starting rate for savings limit must be legislated for each year to confirm the band of savings income to which it applies. And again, that's what we're doing today. This clause, therefore, will ensure that the limit is being held at this level. And this ensures simplicity and fairness with the tax system, while maintaining a generous tax relief and supporting the public finances by taking fiscally responsible decisions. In addition to the starting rate for savings, where, as I've said, individuals with earned income of less than £17,570 can earn up to £5,000 in savings income free of tax, savers are also supported by the Personal Savings Allowance, which provides up to £1,000 of tax-free savings income for basic rate taxpayers. Savings can also continue to benefit from the annual ISA allowance of £20,000. In addition, at Spring 24, the government announced the British ISA, and this will have a new ISA allowance of £5,000 in addition to the existing ISA allowance, and will provide a new tax-free savings opportunity for people to invest in the UK. Taken together, the result of these generous allowances is that around 85% of savers pay no tax on their savings income. Madam Chair, the Government is committed to continuing to support people of all incomes and at all stages of life to save. The significant increase to the starting limit in 2015 means that the taxation arrangements for savings income remain generous. Therefore, the Government believes that it is appropriate to retain the starting rate for savings at its existing value at this time. Madam Chair, the Government is managing the public finances in a balanced and responsible way. The Government's approach to delivering fiscal sustainability is underpinned by fairness, with those on the highest incomes paying a larger share. By maintaining the current rates of income tax and the starting rate limit for savings thresholds, we will ensure the highest earners will contribute more to the revenue, supporting the Government in taking a balanced approach to revenue raising while still protecting vital public services. And I therefore move that these clauses stand part of the bill.
The question is that Clause 1 stands part of the bill. James Murray.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to speak in this debate on behalf of the opposition. And I beg to move the two new clauses in my name and that of my honourable friend, the member for Hampstead and Kilburn. This remains a Parliament of record tax rises. Not my words, Madam Chair, but those of Paul Johnson, the Director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, following the spring budget from which this finance bill derives. The IFS was not alone in their view. In response to the budget, the Institute for Government was clear too, saying that taxes are set to rise, and I quote, to a post-war high as a result of decisions made by Conservative chancellors over the past 14 years. And meanwhile, the National Institute for Economic and Social Research described the Chancellor's announcements in March as, and I quote, a low-key budget unlikely to unlock the UK's growth and productivity problems. The verdict is clear. People in Britain are facing higher taxes, squeezed living standards and weaker public services, and they have a government unable to undo the damage they have caused. No matter what the Conservatives now say or do, the truth is that the tax burden is set to rise to its highest level in 70 years. The decisions taken by Conservative chancellors in this Parliament, and let's face it, there have been a few of them, mean that the average family will face a tax bill that is £870 a year higher by 2028-29. For pensioners, it is even worse. People over the state pension age do not even benefit from any changes to national insurance, meaning pensioner taxpayers will pay an eye-watering £960 more a year by the end of the forecast period. People across Britain are struggling to make ends meet as they find their wages squeezed and their taxes rising relentlessly. Yet the Conservatives have decided to tell the British public that they have never had it so good. I noticed ministers trying to do that again today, telling us that their plan is working. But that is not the reality of life for people who, at the next general election, will be asking themselves whether they and their family feel better off than they did 14 years ago. It is that reality that our new clauses today seek to expose. As the Conservatives gaslight the British people, our amendments today are there to call them out. First, our new Clause 1 does this by requiring the government to come clean over how many people will be liable to pay income tax at 20% and 40% in the current tax year, how this number has changed over the last 3 years, and how this number will change in the 3 years ahead. We want the government to admit the impact that their 6-year freeze to the income tax personal allowance and the higher rate threshold will have. We know that according to the Office of Budget Responsibility, 3.7 million more people will be paying tax by 28-29, and 2.7 million more people will be paying the higher rate as a result of the government's threshold freezes. Will the Minister repeat those figures and admit they are correct? We believe the Chancellor should be honest about this too, and that is what our new Clause 1 would seek to achieve. Now, of course, we know the impact of the Conservatives' decisions this Parliament are hitting pensioners who pay tax especially hard. Taxpayers over the state pension age do not benefit from any of the government's changes to national insurance, and so they will feel the impact of the Conservatives' tax rises even more. That is why we have tabled new Clause 4, again to require the Chancellor to come clean about the impact of his and his predecessors' policies. This new clause requires the Chancellor to set out how many pensioners will be liable to pay income tax this year and in each of the next 3 years, and what the average pensioner's tax bill will be. Pensioners deserve to know the truth about how the government's decisions will affect them, and frankly, they have good reason to be concerned about this government. Whilst Labour has guaranteed that the pensions triple lock will be in our manifesto and protected for the duration of the next Parliament if we win, the Conservatives refuse to say what impact on pensioners their £46 billion unfunded pledge to abolish national insurance altogether would have. As my Right Honourable friend, the Shadow Chancellor, said yesterday, this is a tax bombshell aimed squarely at Britain's pensioners. The Conservatives are refusing to say how they would pay for this massive commitment, and so it is hard not to suspect they are concealing their plans to make pensioners pay the bill. Perhaps they will pay for the revenue lost by abolishing national insurance by making changes to pensions, maybe changes to the rate or changes to the state pension age. Or if they are planning to keep pensions the same and make up the revenue through higher basic and higher rates of income tax, then that would mean rates of income tax going up by 8%. I and my colleagues have asked ministers again and again to come clean on how they would pay for their plans, but they resolutely refuse to do so. They could clear this up right here, right now, by either abandoning their unfunded commitment or by explaining how they would pay for it. I would happily give way if the Minister would like to do so. I suspect, however, he will not. We know the Conservatives find the reality of their tax-raising record so hard to bear that they would rather hang on to a reckless, unfunded plan to abolish national insurance to make them feel better about themselves and to desperately try and keep their divided party together. It is crystal clear that for the Conservatives, it is party first, country second. Now, Madam Chair, we know that the Conservatives' high tax record goes hand in hand with their record of low growth on the economy. Indeed, one of the reasons why taxes are so high is because economic growth has been so weak over the last 14 years. And again, no matter what the current set of ministers say, the idea that the economy is turning a corner is simply not reflected in reality. The truth is that our economy is smaller per person than when the Right Honourable Member for Richmond Yorkshire became Prime Minister. Our country is forecast by the OECD to have economic growth of just 1% next year, weaker than every other G20 country except Russia. If the UK economy had grown at the average rate of the OECD under the Conservatives, it would now be £140 billion larger, growth that would have provided an extra £50 billion in tax revenues to invest in our public services. But instead, economic growth is on the floor, taxes are going up, and public services are falling over. That is the Conservative doom loop we are in. We know the only way out of that doom loop of ever-rising taxes with nothing to show in return is to get the economy growing with Labour's plan. Labour's plan for economic growth is driven by the need for stability, investment and reform. Stability, something so sorely lacking in recent years of Conservative chaos, must be the basis of a secure and responsible approach to the economy. With strong fiscal rules, a new fiscal lock and respect for independent institutions, we will put stability at the heart of our approach.
Extremely grateful to him for giving me. He mentioned Paul Johnson earlier in his remarks, but he's said today, I think, in the press that both the government and the opposition are tied to the same fiscal path. Is that an ideological decision? I'm generally interested in this. Is it an ideological decision, or is it a general election tactic?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention. We believe in the Labour Party that having fiscal rules that are ironclad is essential to having trust that we will manage the economy in a responsible way that puts family security and family finances first. It's absolutely essential to everything else a government might hope to do, to have those strong fiscal rules and to have that stability underpinning every other decision that we make. And indeed, that stability forms the foundation of getting the economy growing, because with stability, we will be able to work in partnership with businesses to remove the barriers to investment, using catalytic public investment to unlock more than £20 billion in the private sector to invest in the industries of the future. And to support that investment, we will reform the systems our economy needs to thrive, from reform of our planning system and employment rights to devolving powers to elected mayors over transport, skills, enterprise, energy and planning. That is how Labour will begin to grow the economy if we win the next general election. We know that a new approach and a new government are needed, because that is what people across the country are telling us. People want a new approach where people can feel better off rather than struggling to make ends meet as their taxes rise relentlessly. The Conservatives are desperate to distract from the mess they have created. They go from the simply unbelievable, like the Chancellor claimed yesterday that they had abolished low pay, to the unbelievably reckless, like their £46 billion unfunded plan to abolish national insurance. But no matter what they say, no matter how hard they try to pretend their plan is working and that people in Britain have never had it so good, people know the reality of life. People know that taxes are at record levels. And today, we want the Conservatives to at least come clean and admit how many more people are paying tax as a result of their decisions in this Parliament and how hard they're hitting pensioners in particular. But frankly, Madam Chair, no matter whether they come clean or not today, come the general election, people across Britain will ask themselves whether they and their family feel better off today than they did 14 years ago. The answer to that question is the reality from which the Conservatives cannot hide.
John Redwood.
I declare my business interests in the Register. I rise to speak in support of tax-cutting proposals. We're not discussing the national insurance reductions in this particular group of amendments, but both speakers so far have spent some of their time discussing them because they are relevant, being the other side of the issues on the correct levels and thresholds for income tax, which are the proper matter of our current debate. And I wanted any kind of tax cut because we are overtaxed, and I think the right kind of tax cuts can speed that growth, which all the major parties in this House want, although there are some disagreements about the exact mix of policies that might create it. And the first thing we need from the Treasury is a greater belief in the official forecasts of themselves and the OBR, in the fact that if you promote more growth by cutting some tax rates, you may end up with more tax revenue. The best generator of more revenue to pay for our public services is a growing economy. The best generator of more growth is productivity improvements. There is particular scope for productivity improvements in the public sector. The public sector was badly damaged by the COVID experience. We lost a lot of productivity through the hasty and necessary reorganisation of the public services against the pandemic, but we're finding it hard work and slow going to get the lost productivity back. I welcome the fact that in the latest set of budget numbers, the government has put in future productivity recoveries over the next few years, but it's slow progress even to get back to the levels of productivity in 2019. And I would put to the government that you don't need to spend extra money on new technology like AI to get back to the levels of 2019. You may wish to recommend schemes for AI investment to get above the 2019 levels, but by definition, you were able to get to 2019 levels of productivity without AI because it hadn't become available or invented at that stage. So there should be more common agreement about the urgency of productivity recovery in public services. We're talking about at least 20 billion of missing money from the productivity problems that have developed since 2020 and the lockdown experience. But there is also a source of extra revenue from lower taxes themselves, because if you cut the right kind of tax in the right way, the tax rate, you will generate more cash rather than less. I think everybody now agrees there is that effect on certain taxes, because it's quite obvious that if you impose certain kinds of turnover or activity taxes, they will lower the turnover and the activity. Indeed, many of the taxes we imposed are taxes imposed with a moral wish to lower activity or usage rates, so that alcohol and tobacco attract higher taxes because the wish is that people buy them less, or in the case of tobacco, buy them not at all. And you get the same effect on things which we should be promoting. Now, one of my proposals to the government is that they should be extremely worried about the large decline in self-employed people since 2019. Now, some of that was the inevitable consequences of lockdown, leading to older people who were working for themselves deciding that they obviously couldn't during lockdown, and they decided to retire a bit earlier. But quite a lot of it wasn't. Some of it was people of younger ages who were deterred by the experiences, and some of it was that young people are not coming forward to replace those who were self-employed. Because I don't think it was just lockdown or the disruptions around that time that caused this problem. I think it was also the IR35 tax changes, which went through in two tranches, culminating about the time that we experienced the lockdown problems. And we have lost over 800,000 self-employed, partly through a self-inflicted tax wound. And the decision was taken in two stages to introduce the idea that the person acting as the customer of the self-employed contractor had a duty to satisfy themselves about the tax status and could be liable if they had made a mistake in their tax status. And that meant it became extremely difficult for quite a lot of self-employed people to get contracts from, say, smaller business or bigger business, because why would the executive take the risk that they could, in the end, be tied up in a dispute with the revenue that they didn't want. So it was simpler not to allow the self-employed person to bid for the contract or to win the contract, because there was this tax bureaucracy and investigation which could put them both on the wrong end of the tax bill and on the wrong end of the moral issue, where it was looking as if they were helping someone to fiddle the taxes. The revenue has always had issues over how you exactly define a genuinely self-employed person, and there are lots of obvious requirements you would have, because none of us want to see people who are effectively employed by a single employer taking advantage of tax breaks that were designed to deal with the extra risk of being self-employed and the lack of the benefits that you get if you are genuinely self-employed. If you're not getting sick pay and paid holiday, you are in a rather different category from those of us who are employed, who get these benefits from our employer as built into the overall package. So those are the normal sort of tests. Are they working for more than one employer? Are they working by a contract for services, or are they working by an employment contract? Do they have sick pay? Do they have holiday entitlement? Do they have other benefits? These are the tests that you would normally apply to decide whether someone is genuinely self-employed. I think we've got too tough from the revenue side. We've lost a lot of self-employed. We're not recruiting the extra self-employed we want. And they are vital to the growth and vitality of an economy. Yeah. If we had a few 100,000 more people self-employed, they will be the innovators, they'll be the price cutters, they'll be the people who go the extra distance, provide the additional service. They will find customers. They will be useful challengers to the big businesses. They won't destroy the big businesses. They will keep them on their mettle and make them understand that they too have to listen more to what customers want, because so often the customer service improvement is generated, first of all, by the self-employed or the small business. And I would then go on to small businesses themselves, because if the self-employed person goes on to take that giant bureaucratic step of taking on an employee or two, and they then have all the bureaucracy and the extra tax that goes with that, we need to make it as easy as possible for them to grow their small business. And I'm very pleased that the government has now said it can raise the VAT threshold, because registering for VAT is a colossal additional commitment that a small business has to make. And it means diversion of a lot of energy into tax compliance rather than in finding and serving more customers better. And so I think you want to delay that until the business is rather bigger than the current level that has been even recommended in the new changes. And so I would urge the government interested in a growth strategy, as I know it is, to allow people to put off the day when they have to register for VATs, that they can concentrate rather more on that period of growth. Now, when it comes to the issue of national insurance versus the income tax that we are about to vote on, I began my remarks by saying I was very happy to support the national income reduction. It does help those in employment. It will promote higher real incomes and more spending, which is what you need for a growth strategy and to cheer the country up a bit. But when it comes to the wider proposal that is not yet proper policy, because it hasn't yet been given a budget or given a timetable, I think we do need to hear a bit more of the thinking from the government before we turn that into a firm manifesto pledge for our main priority for future tax changes. I think, for example, we need from the government a statement as to how people will earn their entitlement to the state retirement pension if there's no longer any employee contribution, because our current entitlement to state retirement pension is based on the number of years and the contributions we've made through NI. You can change that. This Parliament can do anything it likes to those sort of issues, but it hasn't changed it. And I think it does need some kind of green paper or white paper, some kind of thought-through model of what the state retirement pension scheme would look like if we want to end up with no employee contributions at all through the national insurance scheme. Indeed, it might be that it would require the abolition of the national insurance fund, and it would just be a payroll tax on employers in the future going forward, because the fund wouldn't look quite the same without the employee contributions, because at the moment, broadly speaking, the fund pays for state retirement pension with a little balance on top. It's long gone are the days when it paid for the house service and many of the other benefits. There are just a few residual contributory benefits, rather modest, left if you read the details of the fund. So I think we need some kind of representation or analysis of what might happen to the fund. But I also think it's very important to ensure balance and fairness in the distribution of tax reductions, and so I think there does have to be some tax reductions for those who've completed their working lives and are no longer in receipt of employment income. And I think it would be wrong for a Conservative Party to rule out tax reductions that help those who have retired, who've saved, who are now in the position of having investment income because they saved hard and worked hard during their working lives. There needs to be some balance in how we allocate those reductions. I would also say to the government that as it thinks forward to its next fiscal event, as I think we now have to call them, an autumn statement or a mini-budget or whatever the latest terminology is going to be, that there is more scope in the numbers to have a better return of money to taxpayers than this quite cautious statement we're voting on tonight gives us the opportunity to do. And my first observation is that I don't think we can afford the incredibly expensive habits of the loss-making Bank of England. Now, I fully understand that the Bank of England is completely independent to set the base rate and to set out its own inflation forecasts and to conduct its monetary policy through the MPC, and nothing I'm suggesting in any way interferes with that. But we have a parallel policy which began under Chancellor Darling with the Labour government and continued under some successive Conservative chancellors, which was always a joint policy of Treasury and Bank, which had a long period when it was to create money to buy bonds, to create a jointly held portfolio. And successive chancellors of the Exchequer not only needed to give their authority to do that, proving that it wasn't an independent bank policy, but they also gave an indemnity to the bank against all losses. And so I would say to the Treasury bench that we have now, as a country, paid the Bank of England, I believe, £49 billion for losses over the last year and a half or so. And if you believe the OBR numbers, you will see that there are many tens of billions of losses to come over the next 5 years. And those losses come from 3 different sources, and some of them are avoidable, not all of them are avoidable. And so I think the Treasury and the Bank do need to discuss these colossal losses and to understand that the United Kingdom and the Bank of England is now very out of line with the practice of, say, the European Central Bank, which followed a similar policy of creating money and buying bonds in the bad days, but which is not trying to get rid of them all as quickly as the Bank of England. So it's not selling them in the market at colossal losses, particularly the long bonds, which are sitting on very large losses, no need to sell them. And it is also the ECB not paying its full overnight rate on bank reserves, creating a bigger running loss. The Bank of England never used to pay any money on reserves prior to 2006. The ECB has reinstituted zero interest on minimum reserves and has a lower deposit rate than the base rate. So I think there are things to learn from the European Central Bank so that the bank could come back with less huge losses that otherwise distort our fiscal policy very substantially. Because whilst the principle of independent monetary policy, setting the base rate and forecasting inflation, is very important, so too, I thought, was the independence of fiscal policy from bank and other outside interference. Whereas now, the Bank of England is a very dominant influence on our fiscal policy because its losses are so enormous, and that obviously affects what is available to spend or to offer by way of tax reductions. So I do hope the Treasury bench is in listening mode on these matters, because it means we could then, if sensible changes were agreed, look forward to a little bit more tax reduction and flexibility, and maybe a little more spending where the spending is hurting, as with some features of the health service perhaps, so that we could, in future, reinforce that growth policy with appropriate policies that were eminently affordable. Members of the House who are interested will know that I'm very critical of the current control mechanism. I don't think it's a very good one. I think it would be much better to have something more like the American system, where you have both an inflation and a growth control over the economy. And I'm very suspicious of an economy guided by effectively a single five-year forecast by the OBR, because I don't believe the OBR or anybody else has got much idea of what the budget deficit's going to be in 5 years' time, because there are so many different things that can come along to change it. So far from it being an iron rule, I think it's a very arbitrary rule, and about the only thing we know concerning that number is it's likely to be wrong. I think what we need is rather more concern about how much we're borrowing in year and the immediate next year, because those two are much more forecastable. And I'm not in favour of any expansion in the amount of borrowing planned for this year or next year. We have quite a lot of debt, which is why I've tried to identify ways in which the budget arithmetic could look rather better and the fiscal arithmetic could look rather better if we cut those taxes that can generate more revenue, if we can cut those taxes which have a cost but balance it by reductions in expenditure. And I've looked at two big pots, Bank of England losses and productivity shortfall. There is a third area to look for the savings, which I know the government is actively pursuing, and that is the area of getting people back into work and helping and supporting and encouraging those who at the moment feel they can't return to the workforce to be able to do so. And I trust this is fairly generally supported around the House. And that too could both enrich their lives and raise their standard of living, but could also add to our tax revenues and therefore make lower taxes or better public services that much more affordable. And my only criticism of the government there in its efforts is I'd just like them to speed up. I think this is something that needs doing more quickly and on a bigger scale. I think the ideas and the work that have been put in are on the whole very sensible, but we need better results, because there are a very large number of people who at the moment don't feel they can be part of the workforce, and I'm sure some of them could be better off if they felt they were getting the right kind of support. It has to be worthwhile working. And that too, of course, requires those changes in policy now going through to say we're not always going to invite people in legally from abroad to do low-paid jobs, when what we want is more better-paid jobs in Britain and more jobs that engage the potential British workforce who are definitely out there. So I don't think we need the two new clauses that Labour kindly proposed. They're seeking knowledge, whereas I think they probably have quite a lot of the knowledge already, as was implied by the remarks of the shadow spokesman, that of course, if you don't increase the thresholds, more people will end up paying the tax. And I don't want to see too many more people ending up paying the higher rate of tax, which means that to get some shift upwards in thresholds in due course, we do need to go over those issues that will free up some cash. So government, look at the losses, look at the employment situation, look at productivity, find your crock of gold, and then we can all be happier.
SNP spokesman Drew Hendry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As we scrutinise the Finance Number 2 Bill in detail, starting with Clause 1 and subsequent clauses, this legislation serves as a profound symbol of a government that has run aground. The bill starkly exposes the UK government's complacency in the face of the ongoing cost of living crisis that continues to devastate homes across Scotland and indeed across the other nations of the UK. Households still reeling from the catastrophic decisions made by this Westminster government. Clauses 1 and subsequent clauses, as we've heard, Madam Chair, from the government, are about household incomes. Well, the provisions in this bill fall dramatically short of the urgent needs in our communities. I'm used to this place lacking in humanity, but where is the humanity that is never shown to other issues in terms of these domestic issues? People in our communities need help. They want help. They want to know how they'll pay for soaring mortgage bills, how to pay for their food bills, up by more than a quarter in the past 2 years, how to pay for ballooning car insurance premiums and much else, how to pay their energy bills, still, according to the House of Commons Library research, nearly 60% higher than in the winter of 2021-22. Clauses 1 and subsequent clauses don't really get to that issue. And the Labour front bench is right when they talk about the per capita GDP issue in the UK. It's an utter disgrace. But what is Labour's plan? Well, more Brexit, more austerity, and more being wedded to the fiscal rules that have got us into this place. This is a damp and ineffective piece of navel-gazing from the folk who had the wrong idea in the first place, and when it's failed and failed again, every time they've repackaged it, they just put it forward once more. Austerity is bust. It doesn't work, and it's madness for both of these parties to continue to pursue it, but that is what they do. What a broken institution that isn't listening to people this is. Now, the measures in Clause 1 and Clause 2 could have invested in could have invested in the economy. They could have taken actions for that. And the Minister talks about devolution, but instead of devolution of investment, we're getting the devolution of his cuts. The spring budget slashes the Scottish capital funding by 16.1%, severely restricting Scotland's aspiration and the need for things like new hospitals and more. And both the Tories and Labour Party maintain, and I noticed that the Labour Party were happy to quote the Institute for Fiscal Studies earlier, but they are maintaining what the Institute for Fiscal Studies has called a conspiracy of silence over the magnitude of cuts required in the coming Parliament. Now, former Labour leader in Scotland, Kezia Dugdale, has made it clear in an article today that the people of Scotland, in this newly published article, that voting for Labour in Scotland means people having to pay for tuition fees, possibly for prescriptions, for personal care, and likely to see less child poverty interventions such as the Scottish Child Payment, which is already lifting 100,000 children out of poverty through this SNP initiative. They're likely to see those things scaled back. That's the reality of the future under Labour. More austerity. Their consequentials to compliant so-called Scottish Labour will have real-life consequences for the people of Scotland. So, while we will support Labour's new Clause 1 and new Clause 4, as it does offer some, as has been pointed out, some scrutiny, some ability to look at what's going wrong with this policy, then we will support that. But of course, they are ultimately only following slavishly this horrible, hollowed out by their own right-wing extremist government, worn out and clueless Tory government. It's a testament to a government devoid of ideas and vision in a fag-end parliament, characterised by minimal legislative activity, as evidenced by this bill, which contains a mere 26 clauses compared to last year's 352. Now, clauses... go on.
Can you tell us why Scotland grows less quickly than England, despite having more public spending per head?
Well, of course, if the right honourable gentleman had actually done any real research, he would know that the figures for the UK are skewed dramatically by the overheated economy in London and the South East, which bucks the UK trend. And if he looks round all of the counties of England, if he looks to the north of England and looks at the figures for there, he'll be able to see how they are letting down the people of England across the piece. But of course he doesn't want to do that. He just wants to do a lazy characterisation of what's happening that says nothing about the potential of people, which is being ignored and run down by this place and this government and the official opposition, who have no idea how to change this. Now, the section of the bill in clauses 1 to 4 aims to maintain the current rates of income and tax savings rates for another financial year. However, it does little to mitigate the broader fiscal missteps of this government. In contrast, Scotland's progressive approach, and we heard about progressive taxation earlier, I almost choked on that earlier, but Scotland's progressive approach to income tax under the SNP has not only shielded public services from Westminster's austerity, but has enhanced them, generating approximately £1.5 billion in additional revenue, protecting those on lower incomes because most people in Scotland pay less income tax, and when it comes to council tax, dramatically less council tax than across England. And all of those scare stories about people leaving Scotland because of the progressive policies have proved to be rubbish, because the HMRC report has showed that more higher rate taxpayers have moved to Scotland, Madam Chair. So this revenue that the Scottish Government is attracting supports a wide array of social benefits, from pre-prescriptions to university tuition, which significantly reduces the cost of living for Scottish residents. All things that this Parliament would attack, and all things that Kezia Dugdale, as today, posted a warning about if Labour get their hands on the Scottish Parliament.
Nick.
To new clause 5, which was tabled in my name, and which would require the UK Government to review the impact of the tax measures announced in the spring budget, specifically on Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Now, members will of course recognise that the nations and regions of the UK differ in key respects, their strengths, their weaknesses, indeed their respective needs. Yet to a large extent, the UK tax system operates as though economic and social conditions are uniform across these isles. And so I'd like the Government to consider what impact this universal approach to central taxation is having on different parts of the UK, in the hope that a better understanding of such matters will help inform and improve future tax policy decisions. Now, the laudable ambition to level up the nations and regions of the UK stands testament to the different circumstances prevailing across these isles. Now, the Welsh tax base is different to others in the UK. Wages in Wales are much lower than the UK average, productivity is lower, and our proportion of elderly citizens is higher than the average across the United Kingdom. Now, we should ensure that the tax system reflects this reality, and at the very least we should make sure that we understand fully the differential impact of tax decisions on these different areas, whether it be the freezing of the personal allowance, reductions to national insurance contributions, or indeed decisions on corporation tax. Now, I concede, of course, that some fiscal devolution has taken place and that the Welsh Government has the power to set supplementary Welsh rates of income tax. However, these powers are not as advanced as those possessed by the Scottish Parliament, which allows the Scottish Government to create new income tax band thresholds to better tailor their tax system to the specific needs of the Scottish people. Now, a review of the impact of income tax policy, specifically on Wales, could include how it interacts with the current Welsh rates of income tax and inform the debate on any further devolution of tax-raising powers to Wales in the future. And extending the review to other devolved nations would allow for a comparative study on how UK tax policy interplays with the different fiscal devolution settlements in place across these islands, which again would be to the benefit of future tax policy decisions and any government levelling up strategy. Yes, I will.
I'm really grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and he'll be aware, of course, following Brexit, you know, the UK government could have been extremely radical. It could have devolved corporation tax to Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. It could have fully devolved income tax. It could have fully devolved VAT. This is amazing that following Brexit and all the pain that has caused, there's a complete lack of ambition about using the powers that Brexit enables.
Well, I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend, and I couldn't agree with him anymore. The fact of the matter is that one of the supposed benefits that we were told of Brexit and withdrawal from the European Union would be this liberty to tailor and to be flexible with tax powers, to devolve them to different areas and to be very bespoke in the way that we apply them to different areas, so as to promote growth or indeed to reflect the needs of people in different parts of the UK better. And so I do agree with him. It is quite remarkable that the government has thus far failed to make right or make real the supposed benefits of Brexit. And of course, such a review of tax policy could touch on those things, but it'll also be useful given the important link between tax decisions and public spending, and indeed with economic growth. Now, our continued reliance on the Barnett formula, I think the Honourable Gentleman's had... Yes, OK, I will.
I'm delighted to know that were a future Parliament to grant these tax powers to Wales, would he think that to promote faster growth in Wales, he should cut the taxes below English rates, or would he put them higher than English rates?
I'm not one to make policy up on the hoof, but I think it's something that, that this review could look to do so. And if it does show, that the evidence shows that actually tax decisions could be made to promote growth and to level up, as I think the Right Honourable Gentleman is in favour of seeing happen, then I think we should do it. We should follow the evidence. Now, our continued reliance, Madam Chair, on the Barnett formula to allocate funds between the UK's nations is problematic. Not only due to its flaws, but also the inconsistent application of the formula in recent years, to the fact that actually Wales has lost out on billions of much-needed public investment. Honourable members will be familiar with the concerns raised by communities across Wales regarding the way in which HS2 spending has been classified. Now, although not a single inch of track, not a single inch of rail HS2 was to be laid in Wales itself, it was nevertheless categorised as an England and Wales project under the Statement of Funding Policy, thus depriving Wales of significant consequential funding that the Barnett formula would otherwise have provided. Latest estimates suggest Wales has lost out an estimated £4 billion in consequential funding, a figure that could have transformed the country's public transport infrastructure. Now, I understand there'll be a reluctance within government to move away from the Barnett formula, not least as devising a needs-based formula is far from simple. However, if we are to retain the Barnett formula, the funding floor should, at the very least, be updated to use census data from 2021, rather than the 2001 data it uses at present. I am sure the Minister will agree that much has changed since 2001, when I was still actually in primary school. Wales's needs and population have changed considerably, and so I think it's only reasonable that the funding floor element of the Barnett floor is at least brought up to date. Now, such a consideration could be included in the review that I'm proposing, and as well as the review of the implications of UK tax policy in Wales. Again, all of this information, all of this analysis could help inform debate for future tax policy decisions and ultimately ensure that we have a tax system that is fit for purpose and meets the needs of the people of Wales. Yeah.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank Honourable and Right Honourable members for their contributions to today's debate. And as we've discussed in the debate today, the government has shown its commitment to keeping taxes low, to support people to keep more of what they earn. And that's why we've nearly doubled the income tax personal allowance since 2010, ensuring some of the lowest earners do not pay income tax, while also benefiting higher rate taxpayers. Now, the government has shown that it is also committed to ensuring that older people can live with dignity and respect that they deserve, and the state pension is the foundation of state support for them. And thanks to the government honouring its commitment to the triple lock, the basic and new state pensions increased by 8.5% this April, one of the largest ever cash increases to the state pension, so that those on the new full state pension will be £900 per year better off. That £900 number is significant because, of course, that is the average amount by which 27 million employees will benefit from the national insurance cuts. £900 additional for many pensioners, £900 additional for 27 million workers. So I think most people can agree that that is fair, Madam Chair. And of course, the tax system treats pensioners fairly. Pensioners whose sole income is the full rate of the basic or new state pension do not currently pay any income tax. Individuals working above the state pension age also do not pay national insurance contributions, meaning that they already pay a lower rate of tax on their income from work. This means that someone over the state pension age, earning the average salary of £34,500, pays £1,826 less tax than someone underneath the state pension age, as no national insurance contributions are paid on that income. Turning to the amendments tabled on the income tax measures today, Madam Chair, new clauses 1, 4 and 6 would require the Government to publish reports that provide information on the number of income taxpayers by their marginal rate, the number of pensioners paying income tax and their average tax liabilities. These reports would cover past years and forecasts for future years. The Government considers these amendments to be unnecessary given the information that is already publicly available. HMRC published statistics for past years that cover the number of income taxpayers, including breakdowns by marginal rate and age, and DWP published figures for pensioners' average incomes. The Office of Budget Responsibility is the Government's independent economic forecaster, and most recently they published projections of the number of income taxpayers for future years in its Economic and Fiscal Outlook EFO at Spring Budget. These also include breakdowns by marginal rate. And turning to new clause 5, this would require the Government to publish analysis of the impact of the income and corporation tax measures in this finance bill on Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. As honourable members will know, income tax rates for non-saving, non-dividend income in Scotland and Wales are set by the respective parliaments there. HMRC regularly publish income tax statistics which include breakdowns by country. For example, they publish the number of taxpayers in each nation and break this down by their marginal rates of income tax, age and sex. Corporation tax, which is being more substantially covered by my honourable friend later in proceedings, applies UK-wide, and Clause 12 and 13 maintain the current approach from April 2025. The Office for Budget Responsibility produces regular forecasts on the impact of the current policy being applied in future years, and HMRC analyses receipts and liabilities in their annual corporation tax statistics publications, and therefore again we do not believe that these new clauses are necessary. Turning briefly to other additional comments made by honourable members, as always, I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for Wokingham for his always considered and thoughtful contributions. He rightly pointed out the importance of the low tax strategy adopted by this government, and which of course is an instinct of all of us as Conservatives, where we increase taxes out of necessity but always reduce them where possible out of choice. He was right also to point out the necessity to make sure that we increase public sector productivity, given that public sector productivity has, as he recognised, fallen by about 5.9% since the pandemic, and therefore we need to get that productivity level up again and go further. And of course he'll be aware that the Chief Secretary for the Treasury is very much focused on this particular area. He raised many other comments which we've spoken about directly, relating to the self-employed and the innovators of the UK economy, which I always take on board. He also mentioned the Bank of England, which of course is independent, and the separation of fiscal and monetary policy is a key feature of the UK's economic framework. And the government doesn't comment on the conduct or effectiveness of monetary policy, but I'm sure many people have heard his comments. With the greatest respect, I'll turn to the comments made by the SNP spokesperson, who I know very well and like very much, but I think even he will regret comments such as a right-wing extremist government. He knows better than that. This is not a right-wing extremist government. And I'm afraid I will give away.
Just to be clear, I was saying that the Tories have been hollowed out by the extremists on the right wing within their government, not that it was an extremist right-wing government. But of course that's up for people out there to make up their mind about.
I think he just dug even deeper there, but as I said, I like the Honourable Gentleman. I don't always like what he says. And also, I think when it comes to income tax, I don't think that everybody in Scotland would share the enthusiasm for the Scottish tax system that the Honourable Gentleman has, given that the thresholds and, of course, the rates are high, to the tune of up to 5%. My opposite number, and forgive me, Madam Chair, I will try and avoid the déjà vu all over again. We seem to have the same debates again and again, but yet again today we've heard Labour Party spokesmen constantly talking Britain down, talking as if we're in some declinist environment of failure upon failure. I'm sure that is not a characterisation of the UK economy, or indeed our constituents that I recognise, and I wish he had greater optimism and enthusiasm and could support the UK economy and the workers to a greater degree, because after all the UK is doing incredibly well. He was right to recognise that all of our constituents are facing extraordinarily difficult times, he is wrong to believe that that is something unique to the UK economy. That is as a result of the pandemic and, of course, the cost of living challenges, which have had an impact right the way around the world. Given the extraordinary circumstances the whole developed world has found themselves in, what is extraordinary is how the UK has performed so well. And I wish he would recognise the great optimism and potential future of the UK economy. So, for example, the IMF has forecast that we will grow faster than Germany, France, Italy and Japan over the next few years to 28-29. And since coming to power in 2010, I think he should also recognise that the UK economy has generated an average of 800 jobs per day since the Conservatives have been in power. Also, since Brexit, the UK has gone up the global league tables in terms of exports from 7th to 4th. We are the second largest exporter of services in the world and have reached record levels of service exports recently. We have overtaken France to become the 8th largest manufacturer in the world. We have the 3rd largest tech economy after the US and China. We have the largest film, TV and creative industry sector in Europe, one of the world's leading biotech and life sciences industries, again the largest in Europe. We are leading the world in renewables with the 1st, 2nd, 3rd and 4th biggest offshore wind farms in the world. I could go on, but I will not detain you too much longer, Madam Chair. But if the Honourable Gentleman could recognise just one or a few of these success stories, he might actually have greater confidence in the UK economy and be able to talk us up. And for anybody who's aspiring to be government, they must champion the UK around the world instead of talking us down. The impact they would have on investment into the UK economy is absolutely appalling. On the scaremongering now, in terms of what he and others have been declaring over national insurance and, of course, the impact on pensioners over the last few days, I found that behaviour absolutely deplorable. It is either complete scaremongering because the Honourable Gentleman, as we've said before, is not aware of how national insurance impacts health and pensions. The amount of money spent on pensions is about £130 billion. Welfare spending is £260 billion. NHS spending is £160 billion. That is far higher than the total amount paid for by national insurance. To try and suggest, therefore, that there is some direct correlation and that by reducing national insurance, all of a sudden that puts pensions at risk, is either economically utterly incompetent or sheer scaremongering. Again, neither of those are particularly attractive attributes to somebody who aspires to be in government, and therefore I hope the Honourable Gentleman will have the decency to take that back. And as I said, from the whole front bench, the opposition front bench, this scaremongering of pensioners I think is absolutely despicable, but something that we can perhaps expect from the opposition. Moreover, it's utterly hypocritical. Not so long ago, when we had the national insurance debate, the opposition spokespeople, the opposition front bench and the leader of the opposition said that they supported our national insurance cuts. And then when it came to a vote, they didn't. I think this should make the British public think, why? Why would the opposition say one thing and then do another? Well, first of all, that's not a surprise to me. But is it or could it be that perhaps at some point in the future they might hopefully be in a situation where they could perhaps reverse that decision and say, we didn't actually vote for it after all? Again, I think they should be the ones who are straight with the British public. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, thank honourable members for their contributions today, some more than others. The debate will continue, but I hope, Madam Chair, I've explained why it is we do not accept the new clauses, and I beg to move that the clauses that we put forward stand part of the bill.
The question is that Clause 1 stand part of the bill. As many as that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. With the leave of the House, I shall put together the questions that Clauses 2, 3 and 4 stand part of the bill. The question is that Clauses 2, 3 and 4 stand part of the bill. As many as that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. New Clause 1 has been selected for a separate decision. Shadow Minister to move New Clause 1 formally.
I move formally.
New Clause 1, review of impact of Section 2.
The question is that New Clause 1 be read a second time. As many as that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division, clear the lobby. Order. The question is that new clause 1 be read a second time. As members of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Mary Glindon and Samantha Dixon. Tellers for the noes, Mark Fletcher and Robert Largan.
Order. Order.
The ayes to the right, 211. The noes to the left, 276.
The ayes to the right, 211. The noes to the left, 276. So the noes have it, the noes have it. Unlock. We're now coming to new clause 4, which has been selected for separate decision. And I call the Shadow Minister to move new clause 4 formally.
I move formally. New clause 4, review of impact of section 1 on pensioners.
The question is that new clause 4 be ready second time. As many of that have been say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Vision, clear the lobby. Order. Order. The question is that new clause 4 be read a second time. As many of that opinions say aye. The contrary, no. Tell us for the ayes, Mary Glynn and Samantha Dixon. Tell us for the noes, Mark Fletcher, Robert Largan. Order. Order.
The ayes to the right, 212. The noes to the left, 274.
Thank you. The ayes to the right, 212. The noes to the left, 274. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. So we're now going to move on to Group 2, and we will begin with Clause 12 Stand Part, with which it will be convenient to consider the clauses and new clauses as on the selection paper. The question is, the Clause 12 Stand Part of the Bill. Call the Minister, Gareth Davies.
Well, Mr. Chairman, we now move on to debate clauses 12, 13 and 19. Before I delve into the detail of the clauses, however, let me first very briefly set out how these clauses fit into this finance bill. The government remains focused on taking long-term decisions to strengthen the economy by driving productivity, increasing the number of people in high-wage, high-skilled jobs and boosting investment. The government is also ensuring that the tax system is as competitive as we can be under very difficult economic circumstances. We have some of the most generous investment incentives among major economies, including full permanent expensing, which the OBR have forecast to generate almost £3 billion of additional business investment each year, with £14 billion over the next 5 years. They forecast that this additional investment will increase GDP by 0.1% by the end of the forecast. In addition to full expensing, we have an internationally competitive corporation tax rate, the lowest headline rate in the G7, which this bill is legislating to maintain. So let me now turn to clauses 12, 13 and 19 in more detail. Firstly, clauses 12 and 13 set the charge for corporation tax from April 2025. This includes both the main rate and the small profits rate, as well as the thresholds at which these rates apply. The charge to corporation tax must be set every year. It is important to legislate annually in advance, as this provides certainty to large and very large companies who pay tax in advance on the basis of their estimated tax liabilities. These clauses maintain the current main rate of 25% and the small profits rate of 19%, and as introduced in April 2023. Mr. Chairman, tax certainty is of great importance to businesses. I think that's something we can all agree on, and clauses 12 and 13 ensure that they continue to benefit from stable and predictable tax rules. The government has struck the right balance between remaining competitive while raising vital revenue by maintaining the current rates. Mr. Chair, clause 19 makes changes to ensure that the Energy Profits Levy, or EPL, will no longer apply if oil and gas prices return to historically normal levels for a sustained period of time. It does this by introducing legislation to give effect to the Energy Security Investment Mechanism, or ESIM. The Energy Profits Levy was introduced in 2022 at a time of near record high oil and gas prices. But it is right that should those prices return to historically normal levels, the additional tax should cease to apply. The detail of how the ESIM operates was set out in the technical note published alongside the 2023 autumn statement. This legislation simply puts this detail on a legislative footing and provides for secondary legislation to legislate for the administrative details of how the check is made. Current oil and gas prices are higher than normal, and OBR projections indicate high prices will persist for over the next 5 years. The ESIM is a mechanism that switches off the EPL if, for a period of 6 months, the average price of both oil and gas fall to below a set threshold. Now, this threshold is currently $74.21 per barrel for oil and 50 pence per therm for gas. These thresholds are based on a 20-year historic average to the end of 2022, before higher energy prices began, and are adjusted each April based on the annual change in the preceding December's Consumer Prices Index. By providing certainty on the conditions under which the levy will be disapplied, The government is supporting investor confidence in the sector and helping to protect domestic energy supply, the economy, and of course jobs. So, Mr. Chairman, clauses 12 and 13 provide certainty to businesses by maintaining the current rates of corporation tax, and clause 19 has been welcomed by the oil and gas operators and their investors, with the ESIM providing the sector with certainty to support future investment in the UK, in jobs, in our energy security, whilst also ensuring fairness to taxpayers. I therefore move that these clauses now stand part of the bill.
James Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to speak in this debate on behalf of the opposition, and I beg to move the two new clauses in my name and that of my honourable friend, the member for Hampstead and Kilburn. Mr. Chair, in the debate earlier this afternoon, we pressed the government on the impact of tax rises, particularly stealth tax rises, on families and pensioners. Of course, though, it is not only individual taxpayers and their families who are struggling to make ends meet under the Conservatives. Businesses in Britain are struggling too. And when I meet businesses across all sectors, of all sizes, and in different parts of the country, they are clear that they want a government to support them to succeed and grow. And what businesses I speak with want from government, first and foremost, above all else, is stability, predictability, and a plan for growth. That stability is greatly prized by businesses who want to make decisions about investment and growth, decisions that are critical to creating jobs and making people across Britain better off. Yet that stability has been nowhere to be seen under the Conservatives, who have been governing in a fairly loose sense of the word through chaos and U-turns. That needs to change if Britain is to reach its potential, and that will change if we win the next general election. If we win the next general election, Labour will bring the stability that businesses need when they are planning ahead. Now, Mr. Chair, one of the key ways in which we have pledged to offer businesses the stability and predictability they need is through our plan for a roadmap for business taxation. As the Shadow Chancellor has set out, Labour would publish this roadmap in our first 6 months in office to give businesses the stability, predictability and long-term plan that is so important to making those investment decisions. We have already pledged that our roadmap will include our commitment to cap corporation tax at 25%, and with that in mind, we have tabled new Clause 2. This amendment sets out our commitment, if we were to win the next general election, to bring certainty back for businesses by capping the rate of corporation tax at 25% for the whole of the next Parliament. We would take action if tax changes in other advanced economies threatened to undermine UK competitiveness. We believe that the current rate of 25%, the lowest in the G7, strikes the right balance between what our public finances need and keeping our corporation tax competitive in the global economy. I hope that Treasury ministers might accept our new clause, or if not, perhaps they would like to take this opportunity to follow our lead and also commit to a 25% cap on corporation tax for the whole of the next Parliament if they were to win the next general election. This is an opportunity for ministers to show they understand the importance of stability and certainty, and if the minister would like to intervene to match our commitment to capping corporation tax, I'd be happy to give way. No? Why not? Maybe his boss does not agree. Let us not forget that 2 years ago, the Right Honourable Member for South West Surrey, the current Chancellor, went from advocating a 4-point cut in corporation tax to a 6-point rise within just a few months. No wonder they struggled to make any commitments on tax certainty now. The truth is that the Conservatives have become unable to offer the stability and predictability that businesses need to invest. That stability is so crucial to encourage private sector investment and to get our economy growing. Our pledge on capping corporation tax and publishing a business taxation roadmap sits alongside our wider approach to offering stability, not least through our ironclad fiscal rules, our new fiscal lock, and our respect for independent economic institutions. I know from my conversations with so many businesses that there is a huge potential for private sector investment in Britain, and I know how vital a stable government is for that to be realised, because businesses want and need a government who will offer them a partner in growth. They need a government who will offer stability, provide strategic public investment, and reform the way our country works to bring down the barriers to growth. That is how government should be working with businesses to help them grow, create jobs, and make people across Britain better off. Now, Mr Chair, alongside the clauses on corporation tax, this debate also focuses on Clause 19 that introduces a new energy security investment mechanism in relation to the energy profits levy or windfall tax. As I set out at the second reading of this finance bill, we fully support the energy security investment mechanism in Clause 19. We very much welcome the signal it gives, which will help investor confidence in the UK's offshore energy sector. As we have set out before, if we won the next general election, Labour will make the windfall tax stronger to raise more revenue to support our country's energy transition. But as we have also set out, we want to give as much certainty as possible to those companies affected. And that is why our new Clause 3 sets out our commitment that if we win the next general election, the energy profits levy will end no later than the end of the next Parliament. That is a commitment we have made before when we announced our plans, and it is now in the amendment before us. We recognise that by its very nature, the windfall tax is a one-off levy in response to extraordinary profits, and so it is right to be clear about when it will come to an end. But let me also be clear that our reason for wanting to extend and strengthen the windfall tax is to raise revenue we need to support our country's transition to clean energy. This critical transition will create jobs in the industries of the future, bring down bills for households and businesses, and give us energy security and independence. Our plan is to make this transition by 2030, and we need to work hand in hand with the private sector to make this ambitious aim a reality. Now, we know that many of the firms who are paying the windfall tax are the same firms that are and will be investing in the clean energy industries of the future. We know that many of those firms' current employees are also those who will work in the clean energy industries of the future too. And we are committed to working closely with all those businesses and employees affected, including through Great British Energy, our new national energy champion based in Scotland, and through our new National Wealth Fund to manage this important transition together. Now, Mr Chair, as I have set out, if Labour wins the next general election, we will form a new government that can once again be a reliable and effective partner for businesses to help them grow. We will offer stability with our corporation tax cap, our roadmap for business taxation, and our commitment to unbreakable fiscal rules. That stability will help businesses who are considering investment decisions, as will our strategic public investment, part funded by the windfall tax, that will help crowd in private sector funding. And we will make sure that investment can achieve its potential by reforming the way our country works. From planning to pensions and grid connections, we will remove barriers that stand in the way of economic growth. That is how we will get the economy growing after 14 years of economic failure from the Conservatives. As I said, Mr Chair, in the debate earlier this afternoon, if the UK economy had grown at the average rate of the OECD under the Conservatives, it would now be £140 billion larger, providing an additional £50 billion in tax revenues to invest in our public services. But instead, the legacy of the Conservatives' time in office is one of low growth, working people worse off, and taxes rising whilst public services decline. Ahead of the general election, people will ask themselves whether they and their family feel better off than they did 14 years ago. They will ask themselves whether our hospitals, our schools, or our police work better. Frankly, whether anything in Britain works better than when the Conservatives came into office 14 years ago. The choice at the general election will be one between 5 more years of chaos with the Conservatives or stability with a changed Labour Party and our long-term plan to make working people better off. Now, the Conservatives may try to claim that Britain's economy has turned a corner, but the truth is the British people want to turn the page. It is time for a general election.
Sir Christopher Chope.
Mr Evans, it's a pleasure to follow the honourable gentleman, and I wish to speak briefly both to Clause 12, stand part, and also to the new clause to which he's just spoken. Clause 12 is quite a simple clause. It says, the charge and main rate for financial year 2025 for corporation tax is charged for the financial year 2025. The main rate for that year is 25%. Mr Evans, it was only just over 4 years ago that I was re-elected to this House on a manifesto of the Conservative Party that we were going to keep corporation tax at 19% and that we weren't going to increases. And as the Honourable Gentleman has just mentioned and reminded us opposite, the Chancellor of the Exchequer himself thought that 19% was far too high, and he had a radical proposal to reduce corporation tax down to 15%. At the time, I didn't buy into that leadership bid of his, but it's quite clear now that it was an extraordinary gesture, completely at odds with what he must believe, because I presume that the Chancellor of the Exchequer supports Clause 12 of this bill, which sets corporation tax again for the following year at 25%. I think that's far too high. I voted against the increase originally, and if Clause 12 Stamp Part was to be put to the vote today, I would certainly vote against it. But it was with some incredulity that I listened to the Honourable Gentleman for Ealing North, because his new clause talks about reviewing the impact of Section 12. And apart from the incoherence of subclause 1 of that, he says the Chancellor must, within 3 months of this Act being passed, conduct a review of the impact of Section 12. Well, obviously, Section 12 is not going to come into effect until the financial year 2025. This bill is going to be on the statute book within a couple of months at latest. And so what would be the point of, within 3 months of that date, then conducting a review into something that won't be coming about until next year? If he was talking about having a review of the current impact of the high levels of corporation tax, then I would be with you. I give way if he's shouting at me from a sedentary position. Let's have a debate, and I'll happily give way so that he can make his point. If he doesn't want to engage in debate, then so be it. All I'm doing is reading out the terms of his new clause. If he wishes to resile from that, then let him say so. And I'm sure, Mr. Evans, you will accept, even at this late stage, a withdrawal of new clause 2, because the terms of new clause 2 actually don't bear out what the Honourable Gentleman was telling us. I give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I feel the Honourable Gentleman has invited me to respond. The key point of our new clause, as I'm sure the Honourable Gentleman realises, is to make clear that we would cap corporation tax at 25% for the whole of the next Parliament. Does he agree with that?
No, I don't, because that would be capping corporation tax at far too high a level. I would like to see corporation tax reduced, ideally back to 19% as soon as possible. So I certainly wouldn't support any notion that we should stick with a 25% rate of corporation tax for the duration of the next Parliament. But interesting, if that is the purpose of his clause, it is rather opaque, I think we can say, Mr. Evans, because it doesn't talk about that between 2025 and 2030, for example, corporation tax shall be set at the rate of 25%. What it says is that there should be a review of the impact of Section 12 of the Act. And of course, what's this review going to look at? One of the things it's going to look at is how the rate of corporation tax provided for by Section 12, in other words 25%, affects investment decisions taken by businesses. Well, surely we know, and I think he was referring to this in his remarks, having corporation tax at 25% adversely affects investment decisions being taken by businesses, including as to whether or not those businesses wish to increase their investments or invest in the United Kingdom for the first time. And it's because of those adverse investment decisions which have been taken by businesses that we do, as the Honourable Gentleman accepts, have low growth coupled with rising taxes and a stagnant economy. And it surprises me that more of my colleagues don't wish to engage in this debate, because I very much support those on this side of the House who believe that the main objective of the Chancellor of the Exchequer should be to grow our economy rather than stifle it through high taxes and great higher levels of regulation, which seems to be what is happening at the moment. So, in a sense, the honourable gentleman opposite has answered his own question, because high rates of corporation tax adversely affect investment decisions taken by businesses. Why do we need a review to establish that? And if the honourable gentleman doesn't know the answer to that question and wishes to have a review, how can he be so self-confident that he wishes to anticipate the results of that review by announcing today that there would be a level of 25% on corporation tax for the next 5 years? So again, it seems to be a pointless exercise, and Mr. Evans, one's left with the feeling that we are in a situation now where the main parties really have very similar policies in many aspects of relation to taxation. Both parties are supporting very high levels of tax, not as high as the honourable gentleman from Scotland would like the taxes to be, but no, Scotland, where Scotland leads, who knows? If there's a Labour government, then the rest of the United Kingdom will follow, I'm sure, on levels of taxation. But I would like to see my party and the Minister, when he responds to this debate at the dispatch box, taking up the challenge from the honourable member opposite as to whether he supports 25% for the next 4 or 5 years. I would like him to say, no, 25% is far too high. 25% for 2025, maybe that's what we've got to put up with. But thereafter, we, the Conservatives, if re-elected, will reduce corporation tax steadily back to 19%, or even, as the Chancellor of the Exchequer has aspired to 15%. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way, and I have to agree that there is, with his contention, that there is no real difference between the Tories' proposals and the Labour Party's proposals, a point I've made many times. But would he agree that the progressive taxation in Scotland has seen the majority of taxpayers pay less, whilst that progressive element where those who have a bit more pay more, and more people, higher rate taxpayers, have moved to Scotland during that time, that's actually protected some of the services, which is not something that's an offer on either side of this House?
I think the honourable gentleman misunderstands the dynamic effect of taxation. I was privileged, Mr. Evans, to be in this House when the then Chancellor of the Exchequer, the late Lord Lawson of Blaby, Nigel Lawson, he announced the dramatic reduction in the top rate of tax down to 40% and 40 pence in the pound. And the consequence of that reduction was that the overall yield from tax went up. The burden on individuals was reduced, thereby causing those individuals to work harder, to retain their energies for what was happening in our economy rather than taking their talents overseas. And so the honourable gentleman talks about, in Scotland, wanting to have a progressive rate of tax, but that leads to progressively people becoming poorer, collectively poorer. And I think that we can see from the statistics coming out recently that the Scottish economy is stumbling and failing, and that is because of the misguided policies of the Scottish National Party. But Mr. Evans, that's a bit off the point of this particular issue, which is whether or not we support keeping corporation tax at 25%. And I certainly don't, and I hope we'll get some more information on confirming that the government itself has aspirations to reduce the level of corporation tax as well. And what my honourable friend said when he was introducing this debate was that we need to be stable and predictable, and he praised the system that we've got of having really complicated allowances against corporation tax. I would support more tax simplification. If we keep the basic rate down and reduce the allowances, then that makes taxation simpler. It reduces the need to have extra members of the HMRC dealing with all this. It probably undermines the burgeoning accountancy profession, but I don't think that's necessarily any bad thing. So whatever happened, one asks, to tax simplification? We did have a specific committee set up to deal with tax simplification. We used to have tax simplification measures brought before this House. That has all been abandoned in favour of ever more complex tax arrangements, which, far from being stable and predictable, are unstable and unpredictable because nobody knows the way in which those extra complications are going to be either avoided or exploited by those who are affected by them. So, Mr. Evans, you can tell that on this issue, I'm not a happy bunny, and the reason I'm not happy is because we are not committed to reducing corporation tax in the long term. We don't seem to recognise the adverse impact that it has upon our productive economy and our ability as a nation to grow that economy and thereby provide the extra revenue which we need for public services. And I'm also despairing that there are so few of my own colleagues who wish to reinforce the point and get the message out to our constituents and to businesses in our constituency. Stick with us, because we find the current levels of corporation tax intolerable. We have brought them forward because of extraneous circumstances over which we say we had too little control. But don't worry, as soon as those extraneous circumstances are removed from the equation, then we will revert to being a low corporation tax party. Let us have an announcement to that effect today. But in the meantime, Mr. Evans, can I say that if Clause 12 is put to the vote, I shall vote against it, and I shall certainly vote against new Clause 2 for the reasons I've set out.
Seeing as we are not really pressed for time today, unless Mr. Hendry was going to speak for up to 4 hours. Oh, yeah, I can see that. And seeing as both candidates are here, I'll read the result of the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee Chair. Order, order. I will now announce the results of the ballot held today for the election of the Chair of the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee. 290 votes were cast, 2 of which were invalid. Dame Jackie Doyle-Price was elected Chair with 161 votes. She will take up her post immediately, and I congratulate her on her election. The results of the count will be made available as soon as possible in the Vote Office and published on the internet. Thank you very much. We now come to the 4-hour speech by Drew Hendry.
Mr. Evans, I'll do my best to accommodate that request as usual. So, I'm grateful for the opportunity to rise to speak on Clause 12 and subsequent clauses on this. The fact is, Mr. Chair, that these clauses maintain the status quo on corporate taxation, yet fail to support sectors in dire need, such as our hospitality industry, which has seen over 500 closures in the past year alone. Now, the SNP has repeatedly called for things like VAT relief for this sector to alleviate these pressures, yet these calls have been consistently ignored by the UK Government, demonstrating a clear disregard for the economic challenges facing Scotland. And where is the support for our town centres and high streets through enterprise initiatives such as VAT-free streets, which could help to breathe new life into our vital centres? The SNP has called for urgent help, but again, Westminster just shrugs its shoulders and ignores their responsibilities for the damage caused through their calamitous, but as we've seen, and it's worth repeating, unanimous devotion to a disastrous Brexit, to waste and to mismanagement. When we come to the Energy Security Investment Mechanism, the proposed Energy Security Investment Mechanism, adjusting the parameters for windfall taxes based on oil and gas prices, represents a missed opportunity to genuinely bolster our energy security and accelerate our transition to net zero. Instead of leveraging these revenues to mitigate energy costs for households who, as I mentioned in the previous debate, are absolutely struggling under the punishing cost of living crisis at the moment, instead of doing that, or indeed to invest in sustainable growth and probably the only available industrial strategy that we could have, which is to invest in renewable energy, this mechanism is actually poised to jeopardise up to 100,000 jobs and hinder our environmental goals. Moreover, and there is no hiding place, the Labour Party's screeching U-turn on the £26 billion per year required to stimulate the green industrial transition, which they know their own advisers have said is a minimum that is required, and the proposal to intensify the windfall tax to fund nuclear projects in England is entirely unacceptable. Utilising Scotland's resources for projects that contravene our national interests. Now, we will, Mr Chair, support new Clause 3 from the Labour Party, particularly in point 1, because at the very least it will show the opportunity wasted and the squandering of Scotland's natural resources in a bit of a clearer light. But this bill underscores a critical disconnect between the needs of the Scottish people and the actions of this government and indeed this place of Westminster. It's a bill that perpetuates inequality, neglects economic innovation and leaves our most vulnerable citizens to bear the brunt of its failures. As we have debated these clauses today, let us be mindful of the stark reality. Only a government attuned to the aspirations and challenges of Scotland can genuinely deliver the change we urgently need. That government should have all the powers to make changes needed to represent the values of the Scottish people. That needs to be the government of an independent Scotland that seeks to regain a equal seat at the centre of the European Union.
Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr Chairman. Let me thank Honourable... I was waiting for the 4 hours and it never came, Mr Chairman. It was 4 minutes, but what are 4 minutes? Mr Chairman, let me thank Honourable members for their contributions to today's debate. I'll respond to some of the points raised at the end of my remarks, but before doing so, let me directly address some of the amendments that have been put forward. So first, turning to new clause 2, Mr Chairman. This new clause seeks the publication of a review into how the rate of corporation tax set by the bill, set out in clause 12, affects business investment and certainty, including what the effect would be of capping it at its current level over the next Parliament. Now, I agree that it is important to regularly review and evaluate policy, and the government, of course, keeps all tax policy under review. The Office for Budget Responsibility produces regular forecasts, including of projected corporation tax receipts and business investment. These forecasts are based on the rates and thresholds which currently apply and which Clause 12 maintains from April 2025 to provide advanced certainty to businesses. The latest of these forecasts already looks as far ahead as 28 to 29 on the basis of the corporation tax rate, which currently stands at 25%. So no further action is required on, as relates to this government's action on new clause 2. Of course.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. Obviously, the bill does maintain the small profits rate of corporation tax at 19%, but doesn't the Minister agree with me that this is a drop in the ocean compared to spiralling costs in energy, staffing, borrowing and a host of other costs? Chancellor could have used the opportunity in this bill to give small businesses a boost by reforming business rates or by helping them with their energy bills through a proper windfall tax. So does the Minister agree that Liberal Democrat new Clause 7, that with our new Clause 7, that the government should lay a review of the impact of the small profits rate and looking at whether it really helps small businesses to manage their costs? Thank you.
Oh, well, Mr. Chairman, I will come on. I will give her the courtesy of addressing new Clause 7 in due course. But just on support for small businesses, she's right to highlight that the new rate for small businesses keeps around 70% of businesses in the country at 19%, when those most profitable do move to 25%. But look at the entire package of support for small businesses and you will see a government that is supportive of our high streets and small business entrepreneurs across the country, whether it's the increase in VAT thresholds, the 75% rate relief for retail, hospitality and leisure businesses, as well as all the support that we provided during COVID and through the energy shock with EBRS and EBDS. So I would put it to her that we are behind our small businesses. We do regard them as the engine of our growth and we will continue to do everything we can to support them. But I'll come on to new Clause 7 in a moment if I may. But first, Mr. Chairman, to new Clause 3, this would require a review of the possible impacts of the Energy Security Investment Mechanism on energy profit levy revenues and investment decisions within the oil and gas sector. It would require this assessment to be made on the basis of the end date of the EPL falling before the end of the next Parliament. Now, Mr. Chairman, the Government has already published the Tax Information and Impact Note, which sets out the anticipated impact of the eSIM. This indicates very clearly that the mechanism will give operators and lenders to the oil and gas industry confidence in the fiscal regime while the EPL remains over the next Parliament. Based on the OBR's current price projections, the eSIM is not predicted to trigger before the end of the EPL in March 2029 and therefore is expected to have no impact on EPL revenues. In addition, should there be interest in calculating foregone revenue if EPL were to end in a particular year, the OBR published projected EPL revenues over the forecast period and the impact of the EPL ending early can be calculated from this already very publicly available information that is available for all to see. Regarding the assessment of the investment decisions within the oil and gas sector, the government has been clear that it wants oil and gas companies to reinvest their profits here in the United Kingdom. And by legislating for the eSIM, the government is giving these companies and their investors the confidence that if prices fall, the EPL will cease. This allows the sector to continue investing in the economy, in jobs and UK energy security, while still ensuring fairness to the taxpayer, as I said at the beginning of my remarks. Indeed, when the eSIM was first introduced, the Offshore Energies UK trade body agreed that the eSIM was a step in the right direction to support confidence and investment in the sector. However, it should be noted that there are, of course, commercial decisions to be made, and therefore it's not possible for the government to make an assessment of the impacts of eSIM on the decisions of commercial organisations. Now, as I said, turning to Clause 7, which seeks the laying of a report before this House within 3 months assessing the impact of Clause 13 on how small and medium enterprises manage their costs. The introduction of the small profits rate last year kept the rate of corporation tax at 19% for companies with profits of less than £50,000 or less, and the availability of marginal relief means that companies with profits between 50 and 250,000 pay below the main rate of 25%. This ensures that companies have greater post-tax profits to reinvest, distribute and to retain to cover future costs and any shocks in the economy. Clause 13 simply maintains that this approach from April 2025 onwards, providing advanced certainty to taxpayers. It should also be noted more broadly, our corporation tax rules are based on the fundamental principle of taxing profits net of costs. HMRC already release their corporation tax statistics publication annually, which breaks down data on corporation tax liabilities by the size of company. One's tax returns covering the period since the small profits rate was introduced come in. This will be reflected in the data, but it won't happen, I'm afraid, within the next 3 months. Now, my honourable friend for Christchurch made a typically colourful speech in which he made some very valid points, which many in this House will agree that we all want tax to come down. We've, as I've said to the Honourable Lady for the Liberal Democrats, we have included a provision and a rate to ensure that 70% of businesses, the smallest businesses, the least profitable businesses, maintain a rate of 19%. And we've had to increase the rate in the face of an incredibly challenging environment on the back of COVID and the war in Ukraine, where the government stepped in with significant support for businesses, families and individuals across the country. The extension to 25%, I can tell him, will raise £85 billion, which will help reduce our debt over the long term. We've also introduced, as he alluded to, full permanent expensing, which he was sceptical of, I think it's fair to say, but was called for very directly and very clearly by the CBI, by Make UK, and by a number of businesses who do want to reinvest their profits into other endeavours and to plant and machinery. And so I would just put it to him that we should be looking at the effective rate of taxation for a business, not just the headline rate. But even if we look at the headline rate, our headline rate for the most profitable, the largest businesses at 25%, is still the lowest in the G7, which is the most comparable mix of countries for us to look at. We do, of course, Mr. Chairman, want to see tax simplification in all of our fiscal statements, and that's why, if you look at the last fiscal event, we've decided to abolish multiple dwellings relief, and indeed the Chancellor set out his intention over the long term, his ambition to abolish national insurance contributions, and of course that would simplify our tax system quite substantially. This is all in the context of a country which remains one of the most competitive in the world, but it's not just about taxation, it's about planning, it's about our rule of law, it's about our amazing educational institutions, and it's why we've seen investment recently from Tata investing in a 40 gigawatt gigafactory in Somerset. It's why Ørsted have decided to build the biggest offshore wind farm in the world in this country, and it's why AstraZeneca have decided to invest $450 million in a new R&D centre. Investors look at a range of factors. It is not just about taxation. It's also about regulation. And I will conclude by just addressing the opposition's comments, because it was remarkable that he did not mention the Labour deputy leader's obsession with introducing 70 new regulations on business. And this is what would hinder business investment. It is the certainty of a Labour government's introduction of regulation that will hinder business investment, not anything that this government has done in office. And if you just look at our achievements when it comes to business investment, the facts remain clear, of course.
Giving way. Looking ahead to the next Parliament and hoping that it will be a Conservative government in the next Parliament, can my honourable friend give any indication to all those watching eagerly from outside in the business community that 25% rates of corporation tax as a headline are too high and we want to lower them down?
Mr. Chairman, look, we agree. We want taxes to come down, but we are not going to make tax decisions at this dispatch box outside of fiscal events. But it is clear for all to see that this Conservative government believe in low taxes. We've reduced national insurance contributions for 29 million people by some 30% in just the last 6 months, and I think the record is very clear on that. So, Mr. Chairman, the information in the amendments laid down for... I'd be delighted.
The honourable gentleman for giving way. I think he just said that the government isn't in the habit of making up policy commitments outside of the normal fiscal process. So does that mean that the £46 billion unfunded black hole created by the promise to abolish national insurance is no longer a policy of this government.
I would just point out to the Honourable Gentleman that it is not unusual and it is not incorrect for governments or any party to set out a long-term ambition to let the public know where you stand on taxation and what you want to see in the future. We did it, by the way, in 2010. We said we wanted to increase the personal threshold for income tax to 10,000, and we met that. Actually, we exceeded it. It's now over 12,500, so you can earn £1,000 in this country every month today without paying any tax at all. That was a long-term ambition that we have delivered. I will move on, I think. One more time. Go on.
The Honourable Gentleman, who's been generous in giving way. I noticed he was keen to use the phrase a long-term ambition to abolish national insurance. Yesterday, the Chancellor of the Exchequer said during Treasury questions, and I quote, "Our policy is to abolish employees' national insurance." Was the Chancellor wrong?
As I say, it's a long-term ambition, and that is a right thing for a party who is serious about governing in this country to set a direction for the country. It is unusual, I know, for him to understand that having a policy, having a plan for government is the right thing to do. But we are very clear to the British people that if you vote for a Conservative government at the next general election, your taxes will be coming down. So, Mr. Chairman, the information in the amendments laid down at this stage of the bill proposed that we publish is already publicly available. They are not needed, and so I urge the House to reject these amendments.
The question is that Clause 12 stand part of the bill. As many of say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. With leave of the House, I shall put together the questions that clauses 13 and 19 stand part of the bill. The question is that clauses 13 and 19 stand part of the bill. As many say aye.
Aye.
No. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. New Clause 2 has been selected for a separate decision. Shadow Minister to move New Clause 2 formally.
I move formally.
Review of impact of Section 12.
The question is that New Clause 2 be read a second time. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no.
No.
Vision, clear the lobby.
It's not Rob, it's Gaga.
Order. The question is the New Clause 2 be read a second time. As many other opinions say aye. Contrary, no.
No.
Tell us for the ayes, Mary Glindon, Samantha Dixon. Tell us for the noes, Mark Fletcher, Gaga Mahindra. Order. Order.
The ayes to the right, 195. The noes to the left, 266.
Thank you. The ayes to the right, 195. The noes to the left, 266. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Not. New clause 3 has been selected for a separate decision. Shadow Minister to move new clause 3 formally.
Move formally.
Analysis of the impact of the Energy Security Investment Mechanism.
The question is that new clause 3 be read a second time. Has been another say aye? Aye. Contrary, no. No. Division, clear the lobby. Order. The question is that new clause 3 be read a second time. As many of that opinion say aye. Contrary, no. No. Tell us for the aye, Samantha Dixon. Mary Glindon. Tell us for the noes, Gagan Mahindra. Mark Blackshaw. Order.
The ayes to the right, 198. The noes to the left, 269.
Thank you. The ayes to the right, 198. The noes to the left, 269. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. So that's the conclusion of the committee stage, and the question is that I do report the bill, clauses 1 to 4, and clauses 12 and 13, and clause 19 to the House. And let me say aye. Contrary no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through the bill so far as committed to it and made no amendment.
Clauses reported to lie upon the table.